All right. Well, good evening and welcome to the new decade at. Don't make me fight you speakers. Welcome to the new decade here at Amplified. I am excited for you guys, or I'm excited to be here. I hope you guys are excited to be here as we begin a brand new year, a brand new decade here in Amplified. We got a lot of fun and exciting stuff planned for you guys this year and this decade, hopefully. And so I am glad to see you all here. Well, tonight we are going to be looking at, as you can see on the screens, the book of Nehemiah as we continue our journey through the Old and New Testament. And in Nehemiah, we are going to be spending today and a few weeks from now talking about Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the wall. But today we are going to focus on Nehemiah 1 and 2, and we're going to focus on the prayer and the faith of Nehemiah. So let me have you guys do this. If you have your phone out, I want you to take it and I want you to put it in a pocket for me. All right? If you're sitting next to a neighbor that is chatty, stop talking to them. All right? If you've got something that's going to distract you in your hands, put it away, please. All right? Because I know you're here, and maybe your parents forced you to be here. Maybe you don't want to be here, but there's a lot of people who do want to be here, and you don't want to interrupt them, and you don't want to mess with what they're doing and what's going on in their lives. My nose is itching. So, Nehemiah and the book of Nehemiah. To kind of understand where he's coming from, we have to understand this idea of how we feel when everything's going good. All right, let's say you're popular at school and things are going great. Everybody loves you and wants to be around you. That's fantastic. Maybe you're the captain of your sports team and everybody looks up to you. And as you grow throughout the season, they look up to you and expect you to take care of things when the game is on the line. But a lot of times when we're in that type of situation, what we don't want to do is lose that position. And a lot of times we won't want to step outside of that comfort zone when we see somebody being bullied because we don't want to mess up a good thing. All right? Sometimes we don't want to step out that comfort zone when we see one of our friends from church walking by themselves, but man, if everybody knew I hung out with that person, they wouldn't like me anymore. And we don't want to mess it up. We don't want to ask the questions. We don't want to care. Well, tonight, we are going to look at somebody who does just that. And that is Nehemiah. Nehemiah steps outside his comfort zone and does something drastic. And that's what I hope you guys will take out of this message tonight. All right, so the story begins in Nehemiah chapter 1. It tells us that it is in the month of Chislev. All right, the month of Chislev, or November to mid-December. That was the time frame of the month of Chislev. And at that time, he was living in the town of Susa, which is where Esther and her story took place. And the king at the time was Artaxerxes. Okay? Well, it just so happened that Nehemiah was the cupbearer. He would bring wine to the king whenever he wanted it. And so he was high up in the throne, and he didn't get out much. So one day, his brother returns from visiting Jerusalem down in Judah. And Nehemiah hurriedly goes and finds his brother, and he goes, "How was it? How is the remnant of God's people? How are they doing down in Judah?" And his brother looked at him and said, "It's not great. Things are a disaster. The gate is in rubble, the wall is in rubble. There's nothing keeping people out. The gates have been burned, and the people are constantly hounded by the surrounding nations who come in and just take what they want when they want." And this struck Nehemiah. And he became sad, so sad that he couldn't stand up anymore, and he had to sit. And as he sat, he began to weep as he thought about the people and the town. He didn't know them. He'd never even seen Jerusalem or Judah. But yet, he was crushed. And then Nehemiah began to pray. And he prayed this, and it's such a powerful prayer, I don't want to describe it to you, I just want to read it to you. So here's his prayer. Yahweh, God of heaven, the great and awe-inspiring God, who keeps his gracious covenant with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your eyes be open and your ears be attentive to hear your servant's prayer that I now pray to you day and night for your servant, the Israelites. I confess the sins we have both committed against you. Both I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted corruptly towards you and have not kept the commandments, statutes, and ordinance you gave your servant Moses. Please remember what you commanded your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the people. But if you return to me and carefully observe my commandments, even though your exiles were banished to the ends of the earth, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place where I choose to have my name dwell. They are your servants, your people. You redeemed them by your great power and strong hand. Please, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servants and to that of your servants who delight and revere your name. Give your servant success today and have compassion upon him in the presence of man. And he prays this powerful prayer. And then he waits. He has to wait for an opportunity to act, to help to try to fix the situation. And so one day, as he's tending the king as his cupbearer, he had put up a good front, a good face, and he had hidden his sadness. But one day he couldn't keep that sadness away. And the king looked up to him and he said, Nehemiah, what is wrong with you? Why are you so upset? You're not sick. What's going on? Nehemiah said that he was frozen with fear. He could barely move. And he looked at the king and he said, may the king's name be praised, because he knew he wasn't supposed to be sad or confused in the king's presence. And he said, may the king's name be praised. But king, why should I not be sad when the city and land of my ancestors lies in ruins? And when my people have nothing to protect me? And the king looks up at him and he says, well, what is it that you request, Nehemiah? And Nehemiah instantly prayed to God for strength, and then he immediately answered the king, and he said, dear king, please, if it pleases you, send me to Judah to be the governor, so that I may rebuild the wall of the land of where my ancestors have been buried. Please send me there. The king and his wife were seated together, and they looked at each other, and they felt compassion for him, and they agreed to send him. And then he asked, he said, well, will you send me with letters that I can give to all the governors of the surrounding lands that will send me there with safe travel, with your signet that lets them know I'm here on your business? And the king said, yes. And then he said, may I ask for one more thing, dear king? Will you send a letter to Asaph, the keeper of your forest, so that he may send me the lumber I need to build the wall? And the king says, yes, I will do all of that for you. And it says that on that day, Nehemiah felt strengthened by God as he began to prepare for his journey. And in the coming weeks, we will look at the rest of the story. But for today, I want to focus on these two chapters and Nehemiah's response to what was there. And the first lesson I want us to take out of these two passages is this. Nehemiah had the faith to care. All right? Nehemiah had the faith to care. Now, some of you may be going, yeah, so what? He cared for the people. He cared for Judah. Well, let's understand where he was in his point in life. Like I said, he was an Israelite, but he didn't know any of the remnant that was in Judah. He hadn't ever been to Jerusalem. He more than likely grew up in Babylon and had never been outside the city of Susa. He didn't have any ties to Israel or its people other than his heritage. But yet he cared. The next thing we need to know about him is he was the king's cupbearer. Now, most people look at this as kind of a slave position. Oh, he's the guy who tests the wine to see if it's poison before he gives it to the king. And while that's part of his job, that's not all of it. You see, in order to be in the presence of the king, you must be handsome. You must be knowledgeable. You must be versed in the ways of the court and all that takes place in the king's court. You become friends with the king. And most of all, you become an advisor to the king. Because oftentimes he would turn to his cupbearer and say, well, what do you think? What should we do? He lived in the palace. He was living a life of luxury. He had everything that you could ever want. And it wouldn't have mattered if he stuck his neck out for Israel. He could have lived his life as the cupbearer to the king and been wealthy, been happy, and enjoyed it all. But he had the faith to care. He had the faith to ask the question. And he cared enough to ask that question. He asked about the remnant that was left, the city of Jerusalem. He didn't have to. Why would he? No one would have blamed him if he didn't ask. No one would have said, well, it didn't matter. In fact, most people would probably say, why are you asking? Now you're obligated to do something. And that's what happens to most of us sometimes, is we don't feel like we can step out and stand for Jesus. Or we don't feel that we can step out and do the right thing for those who are around us and those who need our help. Because we don't want to affect the good things that we have going on. We don't want to mess up the good life that we're living. But as Christians, as people who choose to follow Jesus, we need to have that kind of faith. We need to have the faith to ask the question, to be obligated. Because that's what's important. He didn't need to be, but he did. No one would have blamed him if he didn't, but he did. He stuck his neck out. And that question changed his life forever. Because as we're going to find out, he leaves the life of luxury. He goes down to Israel. He faces battle after battle. He tells the people as they're rebuilding the wall, have a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other, because you never know what you're going to need. It wasn't easy for them to rebuild the wall. But he asked the question. He took on the obligation. And he moved forward. So let me ask you this. Does your faith matter that much to you? Are you willing to step out, ask the right questions, stand firm in your faith? Just like Nehemiah. Yeah, no one outside of the Christian world would blame you if you just left things the way they were. If you never asked Jesus into your heart. But does faith matter that much to you? And that's what you have to decide. That's what you have to figure out. Will you ask the question? Will you care enough to ask? Will you care enough to weep? Will you care enough to cry when you see somebody being bullied, when you see somebody not getting their way? Now, most of us in here would say, well, yeah. When my parents got divorced, I wept. When my grandfather or grandmother or family member passed away, I wept. And that's one thing, and I completely understand that. But are you willing to weep for someone you don't know? Because they didn't stand for Jesus. Are you willing to weep for somebody you don't know? Because they stood for Jesus and they were persecuted. That's the question. Does your faith matter enough for you to care? Are you willing to ask? Are you willing to weep? And are you willing to act? Nehemiah didn't just stay pent up praying. When the opportunity came, he took it. He acted. He volunteered. He left the lap of luxury and he went to the people. He had the faith to care. The second lesson I want us to take from this is have the faith to pray. He prayed for his people. He didn't know them. Didn't know the land, but he prayed for them. He was brought to tears. He was brought to his knees. And he brought it before the Lord. He prayed. And he prayed. But I love the way that he prayed. Not only did he pray for the people, but he prayed for forgiveness and he prayed for redemption. He confessed the sin of the people and he took ownership. He didn't just leave it as, look, God, I know those Israelites are knuckleheads and they stopped following you. They stopped doing this. They deserve their punishment, but you need to save them. He said, no. He said, I have sinned. I have turned against you. I have disobeyed your commands and statutes. He took ownership and he prayed to them. He asked for forgiveness. He confessed the sin. And God would forgive him. Well, Pastor Luke, how do we know that God will forgive our sins? How do we know that he will forgive us? Well, number one, because he told us. He told us he would forgive us our sins. And God doesn't break his word. And we can see example after example after example with just Israel and Judah of how they turned against him, they sinned against him, and yet he forgave them. Nehemiah knew that. He called it out. He said, remember what you said to Moses. If you turn against me, I will scatter you. But you also said, if you follow my statutes, if you come back to me, I will bring you back and restore you. He will forgive our sins if we ask him. He will redeem us if we ask him. Because he promises to do so. So Nehemiah prayed for the people. He prayed for forgiveness and redemption. And he also prayed while he took action. I love that when the king asked him, what is your request? His first response was to shoot a prayer up to God. His first response was to go, God, Father, help me. Give me strength. And then he asked the questions. And what I love about this is it shows us the truth about God. Because I believe that day, God heard Nehemiah. Well, how do you know he heard Nehemiah, Pastor Luke? It's a gut feeling. I like to trust my gut. But here's why else. When we get to this part, when we start in verse 1, it says that it was the month of Chislev. When we get to chapter 2, it says it was the month of Nisan. Chislev, like I said, was November to mid-December. Nisan is March to the mid-April. 4 months had passed since he heard the news. And every day he prayed to God for the people. He prayed for forgiveness. He prayed for redemption. And I have a feeling that every day he prayed what it says in verse number 1, chapter 11. Give your servant success today and have compassion on him in the presence of this man. So when Nehemiah prayed to God, God recognized his voice. Because he had spent every day for 4 months praying for Israel, praying for Jerusalem, praying for strength, praying for an opportunity. Would God recognize your voice in such a situation? When you pray to God, is it random and inconsistent, or only when you need him? Or do you speak to him every day? Do you speak to him on a continuing basis? Would he recognize your voice when you shoot up a prayer? Or would he hear it and go, what's that? I've never heard that before. As he tries to hone in on what you're saying. He will hear your prayer, I guarantee you. But the question is, will he recognize your voice? So, We've got to have the faith to care. We've got to have the faith to pray. And we've got to have the faith to wait. And that's our next lesson. The faith to wait. Faith takes time, guys. It does. Like I mentioned earlier, this was a 4-month period. I'm sure Nehemiah wanted to do something right away the day he heard that things were bad. But that's not the way things go. It's not like our world today. I mean, today, we get everything at the instant. I remember the other night, I turned my phone off at 9 o'clock so that I can spend time alone hanging out with my wife. And so my phone goes off and it's locked out, and I have to have a code that only my wife knows to get back in. And we were watching something on TV, and I go, oh, hey, I'm going to go look that up. And I grabbed my phone, and it was locked, and I got mad because I couldn't look it up. Because I'm so used to having things at my fingertips that I can just have. And we get frustrated when things don't happen. We order something on Amazon, it's supposed to be here in 24 hours, and it takes 72, and we flip our lid and ask for a refund. We are so used to getting everything right now, this instant, the moment we want it, that when we're forced to wait, we lose faith. When we're forced to wait on the hand of God to work in our life, we think, oh, he's forgotten about me. We don't need him anymore because he doesn't want us. But our faith sometimes takes time, and we must be patient. We must learn to pray as we wait for strength, for help, and for answers. We must be preparing to act, because here's the deal. When the time is right, God will open the door. Nehemiah didn't roll into the king's palace and go, hey, Artaxerxes, I need you to make me governor of Judah and give me all the money to do it and give me safe passage. No, he patiently waited for God to work. And when God opened the door, when the king asked the question, Nehemiah was prepared. He had been waiting for this. And when the time came, he seized it. Because Nehemiah had the faith to act. And that's our final lesson for the night. Do you have the faith to care? Do you have the faith to pray? Do you have the faith to wait? And do you have the faith to act? Nehemiah was scared to death. He was overwhelmed with fear as he replied to the king. Because he knew if he asked it in the wrong way, or if the king wasn't in the right mood, he could be removed from his position and he could be killed instantly. But he was ready to act, and he had the faith that God would provide. He spent 4 months preparing, so when that opportunity came, he popped up and he seized it. And that's what we need. I can tell you there have been so many times in my life, guys, where I've been like, God, why didn't you answer this? God, why didn't you do this for me? God, why didn't you help me here? And I get further down the road and I look back and I go, it's because I wasn't prepared. I didn't recognize when he opened the door. I didn't recognize when he answered my prayer, because instead of being focused on it, instead of having the faith to pray and the faith to wait, I got bored and I decided I'd try to do it on my own. And while I'm over here trying to work and figure things out, he's opened up a door over here. He taps me on the shoulder and I go, I got it, I'm too busy for you. But that's not the way Nehemiah acted. Nehemiah was prepared. He was waiting. And he was ready to act. And that's how we need to live. Some of you may be sitting here and going, I wish God would just make my life easier. I wish God would just do this. I wish God would just do that. Well, are you preparing for it? Are you looking for the way to act? Are you looking for the effort that's needed there? Guys, it's not a magic trick. God doesn't just all of a sudden go, poof, your life's better. Sometimes you have to work at it. Sometimes you ask for something, you have to wait for it. Sometimes you have to put effort in. Things aren't just given to you. And if you think they are, you're in for a rude awakening in 4 to 6 years. Faith to act. Are you ready? And Nehemiah, he had some pretty big asks. Hey, Artaxerxes, make me the governor of a whole province. Send me a letter of protection. And would you mind providing the lumber? Basically, he asked him to do everything for him. That's a big ask. But he did. He was prepared. He acted on it. He was ready. And God finally answered his prayer. I love this story of Nehemiah. Because he had the faith to care. He had the faith to pray. The faith to wait. The faith to act. He was willing to leave his place of comfort and royal prestige to go down to Judah, face the enemies that would be there, and rebuild the wall for a people he did not know and a place he had never been. But he did it because he cared. He did it because he had faith. He didn't have to leave, but he did. And when I read that, when I see this story, it reminds me of another man who had great prestige. In fact, he was a king. And he left his throne. He left his throne in heaven. He sat in perfection. He had angels all around him, singing praises to his name and telling him how awesome and mighty he is. But he chose to leave that place to come down to a broken, dirty, filthy, evil earth with people who did nothing but despise and hate him. He lived a life here where he was persecuted, he was made fun of, he was arrested, he was convicted as an innocent man, and he was put to death for you and for me. And he left his throne, just like Nehemiah left his position. And he put his life on the line for us. He took the faith and he stepped away. Do we have the faith to stand for him when he asks us to? Do you have the faith to ask Christ into your heart? Well, Pastor Luke, things are going great in my life. I don't want to mess that up by accepting Jesus. Pastor Luke, things aren't going great, but I'm comfortable where I'm at. And Jesus just seems too difficult. I don't want to put him into my life. Well, I can tell you, he can make your life a whole lot better. I can tell you, you may lose some of the comfort, some of the things that make you feel at home, some of the things that make you feel comfortable. But in the end, just like Nehemiah built the walls and the people were safe inside, when we stand in our faith for Jesus, when we trust him as our Savior, when we stand for him, he will bring us inside the walls of his kingdom. He will provide and protect us from all this world has to offer, and we will live in glory for him. So will you stand for him like he stood for you when the time comes? Where's your faith at today? Let's bow together in prayer. Here in just a minute, we are going to have an invitation. An invitation is where I invite you to come and meet Jesus. There's going to be leaders standing around the back. I'll be up here up front. And if you want to know who Jesus is, if you want to know how you can put your faith in him, I want you to stand up and go and talk to one of these leaders. I want you to come forward and I want you to talk to them. Because I want you to meet the Jesus I'm willing to stand for. I want you to meet the Jesus that changed my life. It's not always easy. It's not always rainbows and roses. But I know one day it will be. I just have to put my faith in him. Be patient and wait for his coming. The invitation is also an opportunity for those of you who maybe know Jesus. But maybe you're struggling in your faith. Maybe you're having a hard time standing up for him. Come forward to this altar. Kneel down. Pray to him. It's a new year. It's a new decade. Start it off right. Start it off in prayer. Come here and pledge that you will pray to him every day. You will speak to him every day so that he will recognize your voice when you talk to him. He'll listen to your prayer either way. He may answer your prayer either way. He may not answer your prayer either way. But I'd rather be familiar in a one-on-one conversation with my God. He needs to recognize my voice, but I also need to recognize his. So when we start the invitation, you come. Put your faith